Thank you everyone for joining us again, like I said, on a Saturday, which is weekend during the Corona times. Thank you, dear panelists, Govind and Abhinandan. I would want to introduce both of them to all of you. Mr. Govindaraj, Ethiraj is the founding editor of India's first fact-checking venture called Boom. He's also the ex-founding editor of Bloomberg UTV. We have with us Mr. Abhinandan Sekhri, who's the co-founder of News Laundry, a media watchdog and a news website. I'm going to be moderating the session. I'm Juhi Garg, and I run a youth news website called ED Times. We also have with us Mr. Aditya Barlia, who's CII Delhi's chairman. He's been very kind enough to be with us today, but he's hiding somewhere in the audience. So we're going to pull him out maybe towards the end of the conference sometime. Thank you everyone for coming in. Again, I'm going to repeat, there's a Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. It's going to pop up the moment you go there. You can post your questions and we're going to be taking some of them from there itself. So yeah, diving straight into the topic, fake news, as we all know, is no longer a small issue which can be rebuffed or ignored. It's more like the elephant in the room, which needs, I would say, immediate attention, because with the rise of new media, there is this major menace which has come up. And it's more concerning during these chaotic and confusing times, because there's just so much of information overload that's happening. There's a word called infodemic, which has been coined, and I'm sure it's not just in India, it's global. To an extent that a group of 300 Indian scientists are going to get together and they're going to be fighting the COVID-19 fake news machinery by busting viral hoaxes that are trending. And if you come to think of it, something as close as your own colony, I would have so many examples of unverified or unchecked news that has gone viral and has real life impact. I mean, for just a small example, on a very trusted WhatsApp group, I got a forward the other day where, it talked about the address, the block number, the house number, the name of the people in that house. And it said that they've contacted the virus, and guys, please share this as much as you can and be careful. Well, it did have come from good intention, but the fact was that nobody in that house actually had the virus, because we were just lucky we knew the immediate neighbors and we checked with them, and they were as concerned, as stressed, because deliveries were not happening, and everybody thought that this house needs to be marked. And you can understand the invasion of privacy when your house number is shared, when your surnames are shared. So stuff did get real for us then. My first question to Govind and Abhinandan therefore would be, what is that one or two examples that you saw during this pandemic situation of fake news going viral, which had real life impact, real life repercussions?
Okay, I'll go first. So, let me give you a quick sense of the phenomenon. So, we've been doing this since late 2016. And as we've seen, the phenomenon of fake news has obviously grown and expanded. And also along the way, it's become more architected and designed. As in, there are people now who construct, who design and then disseminate at very high velocity, which is what makes it so powerful and fearful. So, in the past, we saw that a lot of misinformation was tied to, let's say, political events like elections and so on. In terms of quantity or quantum, health and medicine followed a little later, but it was always a small portion. What we've also seen, and we are seeing the merger of two trends. So one trend is that you're seeing a lot of misinformation flow in general, as we've seen, let's say, the growth of telecom infrastructure or mobile phone infrastructure. For instance, if you see in the same period that I'm talking about, we've gone from maybe 240 to smartphones to maybe 480, 500 million smartphones, right? So it's a huge jump. And for most people, at least in India, a mobile phone or a smartphone equals internet equals WhatsApp. And this is really the foundation of this whole distribution system that's happening. So now, earlier, a lot of the architected disinformation or misinformation was, let's say, pushed at the time of elections or in the run-up to elections with a political objective. So that's the communal, social, and political part. What we saw subsequently, particularly whole of last year and now increasing and into this year, is that any major event usually triggers a flurry and a flood of misinformation. So it could be floods in Kerala, literally. It could be, let's say, Indo-Pakistan tension at the border. And it could be now the COVID-19 virus. Now, the COVID-19 virus has, of course, taken the whole thing to a completely new level that we've never, ever obviously expected, thought, or even anticipated. Now, we are in India we are obviously seeing a lot of it, but perhaps unlike all the other trends that I talked about earlier, we are now in a way at global level, as in there is misinformation now flowing freely globally. A lot of global misinformation is coming to India. Some of the India stuff is going out. And as anxiety and concern rises amongst people, which is you and me, we are also sharing far more stuff because we think that we may have found a cure, or this particular cure is going to be something, or I have heard that the government may be shutting down my city. Of course, now we are completely shut down. But if you remember, in that period up to the lockdown that happened, there was so much concern. So each of these things has sort of triggered vast flows of misinformation. Now, I'm not sure how much of it is mischief, how much of it is architected, and how much of it is just people who are, sharing information with one another, not knowing sometimes that this, instead of going to, let's say, just 100 people in a WhatsApp group, goes to maybe 10 million people by the end of the week. So we don't know. So, but the fact is that the quantum that we're seeing has grown in geometric proportions and at levels that we've obviously never seen ever before. In the case of COVID specifically, at Boom Live, we've done something like 126 stories, and this is detailed stories just from Jan 24th. And I'm going to show you some stuff that we've done. And these are really the top 5 stories that have played on our website. So here's, I mean, I'm not going to read through everything because it tells you the claim and it tells you the fact as well, right? And this is the Chinese intelligence officer story, something that we are still seeing. And this is, we've now published this for the 5th time because it's so viral. Image of Brazilian president breaking down, again, one of those global pieces. And while these are also amongst the most highly viewed, it's interesting that many of these stories are also global. So you can see how people are taking images, taking videos, which I'm not playing any here, but taking videos and images from completely different contexts and trying to share them, saying that these are, this is something that's happening to you or happening in your area or locality or so on. So this is where we also think that, there is design involved, because people, when they take things like this and they push it to you, it's almost as if they're saying that, okay, I want to really scare you. I want you to really feel and fear that this is something that is happening right in your city or somewhere near you, and therefore increase the fear. So why is this happening? Is this deliberate? Is it a state actor? Is it someone else? We don't know, but it definitely has impact. I was talking about the stuff in the run-up to the lockdown and a little after, and you can see how obviously people have tried to create fake notices, and there are many such notices, including purportedly from the income tax department. Right. So these are some of the examples that illustrate what the nature of the problem that we're facing. And even as we speak, we get posts and forwards. We have a WhatsApp helpline almost every few minutes, and coming from mostly all over the world. All over the world, but mostly within the country. And it's really tough for us to respond, try as hard as we might be. So I'll pause there.
Abhinandan?
Well, regarding real life impact that fake news has had, I think one is related to coronavirus. There were many nuskhas going around and people were trying it. Some were posting it on social media that I've tried this, I've tried drinking this, I've tried covering myself in this. Now, obviously that is not going to protect you from corona, but that was a real life impact of misinformation that was going viral. And the most common one was of the child kidnapping, which didn't have anything to do with corona, but there was a public awareness spot made also of don't believe that, because there were people lynched, believed to be child lifters. but like Govind said, he explained the technical aspect and the technological aspect of how it's become a phenomenon now. That there is a boom in smartphones, internet penetration, connectivity. Everybody has one, so they get information straight from there. So while that is the technological reason, I think there is also a sociological kind of reason which has just tied into the tech aspect of it, and that's the world over. Earlier, with any sort of information, and I, in other seminars or panels that I've sat on, there are many people from the news business, like Govind and me, who say that fake news always existed. Why you make such a big deal of it now? And I think that's a rather poor excuse for either trying to cover up or justify the active use of it. Earlier, there were many filters from an utterance or a piece of information going out there to it getting mass consumption. Now, that filter could be a printing press through newspapers, a television broadcast, people's licenses were at risk, people's credibility was at risk. And there was also not such a high social premium of success that was based on false data or false claims. What has happened is there have been too many examples the world over, politically and business-wise, and for social capital as well, of misinformation working. And that ties in with the technological spread and the penetration, that now, because those filters don't exist, if I have a Twitter following, or certain people, let's say 50% follow me because they like me, 50% follow me because they hate me and want to troll me. But the ones who like me, if I say something, they say, "Chalo yaar, Govind ne bola hai, to theek hi hoga." And so there's no filter. Now Govind can use that lack of filter to really communicate stuff that is outright wrong. But Govind doesn't have any incentive to do that because his entire business would collapse. But if Govind were a politician, he might want to use that. I personally think the biggest cause why fake news has become such a phenomenon the world over, and I'd recommend a podcast on NPR Planet Money where they tracked down one guy who was actually making thousands of dollars spreading misinformation about Hillary Clinton during the last election, which Trump won, and just what modus operandi he followed. And I think that the title of that podcast is The Great Fake News King. And he was somewhere in Miami in this little, garage, and he was just churning out stuff, and it was going viral.
On YouTube, this video?
No, it's a podcast. It's an audio podcast. It's on NPR Planet Money. So, so you get an idea of the incentives behind it. And therefore, I think while there are people like Govind who are working on a mix of tech and editorial processes to bust fake news, there are tech hacks coming. I think the biggest intervention has to be political. And that can only be when there is no upside to spreading fake news for political purposes. And until we get there, I think we are fighting a losing battle, which doesn't mean we should stop fighting, but the odds are stacked against us. Those of us who are interested in getting credibility news. And one more thing I'd just like to put out, because I've seen some questions related to that, and I'll let you take those questions. People are talking about objectivity and bias and fake news. They're different things. Objectivity and bias is not the same thing as fake news. I mean, I'm just telling you from a journalistic point of view, the moment I arrive in a town, which story I choose to do is the end of objectivity. I mean, I could arrive in Delhi and I could do a story on how people are distributing food grain. I could do a story how laborers are starving. I could do a story on how environment is better. I could do a story how noise levels are down. The moment I pick one story over the other, there is a bias, because that story will make some people look good, some people look bad. But the story itself should be within facts. So it is possible to do a biased story, which is factually accurate. Being biased is not the same thing as lying. And that is another kind of media literacy that, media consumers need to understand. Because unless you're in search of God and you're the Buddha or Guru Nanak, don't expect objectivity from the species that we are. And finally, we've done a whole bunch of these fact-checking things. I'll just share my screen there.
We still just see you, Abhinandan, not your screen.
Okay, hang on. Okay, I'll figure this out. I'll just I'll just do it in a bit. Just a second there. Oh hell. Okay. All right. This is clearly not working. I take back my bit about my uncle age being behind me, and I know how to do this.
Yeah, you've still not learned it yet.
Click on share screen. Click on share screen, the green one at the bottom.
Yeah, I did, but anyway,
take you to the,
I'll figure that out.
Or would you want to like send this the link or your?
I'll figure this out right now. But what I want to say on News Laundry, we did a bunch of fake news busting. Some of it was related to the Tablighi Jamaat information that was put out there, and we did a investigation into where that news originated from, who were the people who were being accused of having covered up. So, and there are many such stories we've done. We have a show called Nuisance. It's a video show where we do a satirical take, but where we also call out fake news. And lastly, before I hand back to you and you can take questions, I have done a podcast. It's an hour-long podcast on objectivity. It's on newslaundry.com in our podcast section. It's a part of the series Let's Talk About. So it's called Let's Talk About Objectivity. I urge people to listen to that podcast so that they can at least, clarify in their mind, are they pursuing objectivity or are they pursuing accurate news? Because you can have accurate news and not expect objectivity. That distinction is very important. And I don't think people make it often enough.
But I think the underlying point is that any sort of news which is verified is not fake news. I mean, fake news is a very different ballgame, which probably people are getting a little, I think, overwhelmed with. And that is why when they see a certain news media bring out, let's say, their bias of that particular news, they confuse it with the fact that we are trying to spread fake news. So you're right, maybe that podcast is going to help us really understand what is news, what is objective news, what is subjective news, and what is fake news. So I think the most important question, which everyone, even if I see the kind of questions that are being put out to us, people want to understand that how do we exactly identify a piece of news to be fake? Are there specs? Is there a WhatsApp forward with, let's say, a lot of emoticons or a lot of sloganeering, which we understand, okay, this can be a red flag? Or are there some sort of specifications that should put a doubt in our mind? And how do we identify that to be fake? And how do we verify it to be credible anywhere?
Right. So let's take, I'll go first. So let's take the COVID-19 as an illustration, right? So now what do we know for a fact? We know for a fact that there is no cure. Absolutely. I mean, period. There is no cure for COVID-19 as of today. A whole bunch of treatment paths are being tried. Some are working, some are not being allowed. Depends on which part of the world you are. But the fact is that there is no cure and there is no known cure. So therefore, it is highly unlikely, and particularly if you're an educated person, it doesn't matter in what language, which region, which part of the world. If you're an educated person, the forward that you get saying that, you should be, if you gargle with salt water, or if you drink garlic water, or if you take these seeds, you will be cured, or if you take a blow dryer and start blowing it into your nose. This is all stuff which has gone viral, by the way. So the fact is that none of it works. I mean, it is good if you're inquisitive. It is good if you keep, arming yourself with more and more knowledge, as we all are, because as we are all curious, we're trying to find out why, what is the science behind COVID-19 virus? Why is it so deadly? Why does it spread so fast? How is it that something that jumped from one bat to one human being in Wuhan, China, is now all over the world without any distinction, and the Prime Minister of England went into ICU. So this is something that we are all globally, curious about. But that does not mean that should actually tell you for a fact that if there was a cure, this would be something that all of us would know. So therefore, at least in this case, and I can extend that to many other cases, do not trust as your first response anything that you get which even vaguely suggests that it could cure the problem, right? This is one thing. The second thing is, then there's a whole bunch of stuff saying, immunity and so on and so forth. Now, this is gray. Okay. So obviously, if your immunity is high, you're not going to contract the virus, or if you've contracted the virus, it may not have the same impact. if you're the kind who wants to delve deeper, start looking at the data, look at how older people are maybe getting more affected, those with comorbidities are affected, those with prior conditions are affected, younger people are not so affected. And also, if you were to, again, if you were to investigate this further, you'll find out that more than 80% of people are not affected at all, in as much as they may have some mild symptoms. I've had friends in the US who have contracted it, have been at home, have suffered high fever, but are already recovering. Okay, so the point is that you have to look at every piece of information that flows in the case of COVID-19 that I'm illustrating, with suspicion. Okay, now extend it to almost anything in life. Okay, whether it's something that the government is supposed to have said, whether it's to do with history, science, Lay's chips have plastic in it, Ashirwad atta has plastic in it, quality ice cream is non-vegetarian, Tata salt has cyanide. I mean, this is all stuff that has gone bizarrely viral, right? So do not trust something that first of all, you cannot ascertain or verify through a source that is known to you. Now, if you feel that, okay, there is a source that you trust, maybe it's a media source, and that media source has said that, okay, I know for a fact that this is, either this is poisoned or this is, or a cure has been found, then I guess you have to go with that. But unfortunately, this is a problem that cannot be fixed on the supply side. It has to be fixed on the demand side. You and I have to educate ourselves. Abhinandan used the word, it's literacy and it's internet literacy. If we are not literate about the way we consume information or content on the internet, then pretty much the battle is lost. Because all of what some of us are doing are trying to fight the battle on the supply side, and in some ways on the demand side. But the solution, whether it's COVID-19 or anything else that we will encounter in the future, and we will encounter, has to be fixed by us becoming more aware, more literate, more suspicious, more wary, and having a predisposition to check and authenticate every piece of information that lands in our WhatsApp inboxes.
So I think it's maybe easy for you to say that, right, if something comes from WhatsApp, we see it with suspicion and we already put it in the red flag zone. But I've also seen a very small example. Azim Premji donates 50,000 crores towards COVID. Now that came on a mainstream media website, one of the biggest in the country, and they let out that news. And right after that, Wipro came forward and clarified, no, that was what Azim Premji did in 2019 as part of the philanthropy where he donated his wealth. And a few days later, the news that he's donating, I think 11,500 crores for COVID came out. So also tying into a question that Nishtha is trying to ask, thank you Nishtha for that question. I'm going to paraphrase it a little and put up that question to Govind and Abhinandan, is that it's, WhatsApp forwards can be ignored, and let's say the educated or the aware crowd, even if, they're literate, a lot of times they're not very aware, can ignore the WhatsApp forwards. But what about pieces of information that come out from news outlets? And that is what confuses a normal citizen.
Okay, so I'm going to hand this over to Abhinandan, but just let me add a quick prelude to that, is that really we are talking about two different things. We're misinformation of the nature that flows through end-to-end encrypted platforms and social platforms is what I'm largely focused on, and that is something that does not, in a sense, it's an undercurrent. It flows it flows in the nether regions of the internet, so to speak, because it's not there out there. It's difficult to spot where it started or sourced and so on. What you're talking about now is really mainstream media either making mistakes, either deliberately in some cases or otherwise, and I think that's something that Abhinandan is better positioned to respond on.
Yeah. So, two things. One is regarding legacy media or media organizations that are in the business of news, which is not just WhatsApp forward, putting out incorrect information. I will just talk about that. When we set up News Laundry, this was in 2012, we started work in 2011. That time, fake news wasn't such a big thing. It was more like we thought that there has to be a platform that critiques the media, because the media would critique, report on, give you reports about and comment on business, industrial houses, bureaucrats, politicians, film stars, but media would not critique media. There was this unspoken code. So we thought, and we were a bunch of media professionals, and Madhu Trehan being one of the most, well-known journalists in India. When I was growing up, she was the biggest there was. We decided to, start newslaundry.com then. But when, it came closer to 2012, 2013, 2014, we realized fake news in legacy media has become a big thing. Earlier, it was just the quality of content. So there's qualitative analysis and there's quantitative analysis. Now, even stuff that can be quantified and measured and put in black and white, fact and truth, that legacy media has started doing. How we will combat this, I will just come to, but the earlier part of, you talking about how does one push back? Like Govind said, I think it has to be fixed at a demand side. The supply side won't really change. And how do you, if you get a WhatsApp, I think the first thing that I have started doing, and even if some people don't like it, because some people get defensive, because we live in very polarized times, you have to understand that. And that is the ether we are swimming in. So there's no point avoiding that. The world over, we live in politically very polarized times. So even if someone puts out a WhatsApp without any, majorly malicious intent, and you're very genuinely just type out, what is your source? Because a WhatsApp is not a source. People get very defensive. Are you doubting me? I think you have to say, sorry, if you get offended or think it's rude, we have to get used to it. The first thing you should say is, what is your source? And then we can talk about how credible the source is or not. A WhatsApp forward is not a source. So I would urge everybody, and there was again, I think WhatsApp had only made that public awareness spot that, send it back. How do you know? Who told you? Where is this from? So the moment, whether it's a group, if it's a family group, if it's your uncle, auntie. So we live in an age where when I was young, we communicated face to face. Even landlines were not in every house when I was a child. I mean, the neighbor's house had a landline. Not everybody had a landline. So it was not cool to say, dude, I don't know, that Surat in lockdown, who told you? Pata nahi, my neighbor told me. You'd be laughed at. The thing is, there was a social cost to bear for behaving like a fool. Today, there is no social cost to bear for behaving like a fool, because we are in the flux. We are going from an age where if we read it in the written word, there was credibility in the written word. Today, people communicate not through personal interaction, but through text. But the credibility of the written word is coming of our generation, and the speed of communication is coming from the next generation. And we are caught in that middle. So you extract the credibility of the written word of the 80s, and you bung it in with the speed and the stupidity of communicating through text of the 2020s. And you have a perfect storm of disaster. So we have to make it uncool to cite WhatsApp and non-sourced content or information as something that can be shared. You have to be shamed into saying, no, it's not cool. Just like for the longest time, and this is a case study, tobacco, anti-tobacco advertising was as a health thing, that it is unhealthy. It was not half as effective as when it was that it is uncool. In the US, I mean, it may not work the world over. In the US, smoking is uncool worked as a better advertising strategy, as a public awareness strategy, than smoking is unhealthy. People didn't give a shit about being healthy, but they gave a shit about being cool. So sharing stuff without source is uncool. Coming to news, I think that is the biggest challenge of our time. And this ties in with the first point I made. If the world over, it is politically beneficial to use fake news in a country like India, where news platforms are dependent heavily on the state. There is no cost to going with fake news. And like I said, we will keep fighting the battle, but the most effective, hack has to come from the government. And I give the same example wherever I make presentations, whenever I go to speak in colleges. If you go to Singapore, it is the same, bit I say. Before every film, they have this, 2-3 minute video of if Al-Qaeda attacks or if there's a terrorist attack, how to respond. Of course, and I always wonder that who's attacking Singapore and whose crosshairs are you in? But they will use that captive audience to give that message. What do we use the captive audience for? Stand up and sing. It's a dumb idea. We specialize in dumb ideas. You have a captive audience. You have a message to give them. What message do you give them? Stand up and sing Besura. The problem is, unless the solution comes from the top, it is not going to be as effective as people like me and Govind fighting it.
But the question then is that what can the government do, or what intervention can they have? And we have a question to that effect from the audience. What can the government do to ensure that this is curbed? Because going after WhatsApp and Twitter, doing cases on them, do you think that's the answer, which is what happened a few weeks or a few months back in one of the cases? I think it was the anti-CA Times when there was a case that was done on WhatsApp and Twitter. And do you think that's okay? Is that the way the government should interfere?
I mean, this is clearly, this is in a flux. I mean, as of yesterday, the Mumbai Police Commissioner has issued a notification, which is in a sense unprecedented, saying that section 144 of the criminal code has been now extended to include posts that are on social platforms like WhatsApp, which could be communal in nature, or spreading misinformation on COVID-19. So WhatsApp administrators, now this is the rumor that's been flying around for a long time, right? That WhatsApp admins may be jailed.
Yeah.
So as of yesterday, at least in Mumbai city, it is in force from the 10th of April to the 24th of April. As of now, I don't know whether they'll extend it or not. So you could, someone could go and complain, and technically you could be taken off to a police station, and maybe you'll be in jail. So this is an extreme response from the state. The problem unfortunately or otherwise at this time is that most of us feel that we need something like this. The concern obviously would be that do you want such laws lying around when after COVID-19 has gone? You know, do you want the police picking up people just because I went and complained against someone, or I didn't like what you said? Because it's easy to define some of these things, but as you go, as you go deeper,
it can be subjective.
Yeah, there are a lot of gray areas. I mean, I may have said something that you didn't like. That doesn't mean it was either communal or meant to create communal tension or whatever. Anyway, so the thing is, this has already happened. And I don't know whether, and some different cities or different states may respond differently, because policing is a state subject, but we are now already in that territory. And therefore now I think the question is, how do we navigate it from here onwards? And, but I think there has to be some mix of both. The social platforms have a different responsibility. I think social platforms are obviously trying to clean up using artificial intelligence, working with fact checkers like us. But the flood is so high that they're unable to push back or to stem it. But I think a combination of some sort of legal pressure. I'm not saying section 144, which is a colonial law, plus maybe the platforms becoming more careful, which, I mean, I'm not saying that they are not, but over time as they get more careful, with finally awareness amongst us, where, I will question my uncle in my WhatsApp group. I know who is older and I have to be respectful, but I will still question that, why, what is the source, as Abhinandan said. So I think it's really a mix of this, but on the legal part, I think we're already here.
Yeah, you're very right. I think Aditi, there's a participant by the name of Aditi. Thank you so much for posting that. She says, how do I get my mother to believe that WhatsApp forwards are not factually correct? So that's exactly what you're saying, that we need to ask them, or Abhinandan said that please go back and ask, what's your source, mom? And what I do is that the moment they'll post something on the family group and they're also excited, oh my God, we won the best national anthem award, or suddenly onion seeds are going to work and, cure COVID. So keep having it the whole day. I'm going to go on Google, I'm going to search the keywords, and there'll be at least, 1 or 2 results which will say that this is fake and that's not really happened. The same in case of, I think in the morning, there was a forward of Ratan Tata, and he went to his Instagram to say that I have not posted this. This is not me. So please come to my Instagram to see if I have to say something, I'm going to say it here. And
so, that's an interesting example. Can I tell you how this the phenomenon of misinformation works? So I on my school group, someone posted that, and I said it's fake because he himself has denied it, and we're going to be filing a report. So my friend came back and said that, but it sounds true. He's saying the right thing. So this is how biases work, right? So you feel that it's a good thing that he's saying, or he's likely to say it, or you would want him to say it. So therefore it must be true. It doesn't matter whether it's actually not true.
But who's benefiting? I mean, my question.
So I don't know. I
Who's
mean,
benefiting?
there could be many people who are benefiting. It's plain mischief. It's design. It's very difficult. Each case is pretty unique in that sense.
I don't think there's always necessarily a beneficiary. I think the more dangerous ones have a beneficiary. The ones that are just, time pass may not have a beneficiary, but they are still fake news and must be categorized as such. But, what you said about platforms and government intervention, I mean, it comes back to the point I've made earlier. The world over, there has to be a premium associated with being accurate or honest. We live in a time, and I will not take Indian political examples because it's an Indian audience, and this should be a non-partisan issue. And if you, give Indian examples, it becomes a partisan issue. The President of the United States still has a tweet up with a graphic which gives completely inaccurate information about shooting. Because of his, racist dog whistles during his campaign, his claim of how many blacks kill blacks, how many whites kill blacks, how many gun violence victims who are black have been shot by other blacks. It was a completely wrong data pulled out of nowhere thing he put up. He till date hasn't deleted it. While it has been proved wrong by mainstream news, credible organizations, he still hasn't deleted it because there is no premium associated with or any shame associated with the President of the United States having a wrong tweet up on his personal account. So it brings me again, you see, why is there, I keep getting sociological on this, but why is there a premium on leadership in our species historically? And why is Gandhi such a big man? Why is Churchill, irrespective of how racist he was, such a great Briton? In that BBC series they did, he was one of the greatest Britons. Why is Roosevelt such a great leader? Why is Washington such a great leader? Up to now, why is Modi such a great leader? I mean, leaders, there is a premium to leadership in society. And unless the leadership feels that this is a problem that should be dealt with, we will always be, it will always be a very difficult battle. So while this may seem like a very wishful thinking kind of scenario, and like I said, we will keep fighting it. But until we get a leader who has a credibility the world over, as I want to put information and facts before anything else, we will keep doing these small seminars, small outfits will keep fighting it, while the bigger entities will benefit from misinformation because they have tasted success with that formula. And this is the world over. And it is brazen and shameless. And which is why, for me, shaming is step one. You start shaming people in your... And I don't mean you have to put a tomato and anda on them and shame them. Just say, dude, that's wrong. It's like, it's not cool to say, acha, billi rasta kaat gayi, chalo thuko phir niklo. If you do say that to someone, they'll say, shut up. We have to extend that same logic to the digital world. And like I said, we're in a flux. On digital world, we are applying print credibility rules. We have to bring offline credibility rules to the online world.
So do you think that it's more with the rise of new media that we are seeing rise of fake news? And should we trust, let's say, print media more? Should we not trust Hindi news channels? That's a concern that's coming from our audience too.
Abhinandan, I think it's his.
I think, see, when it comes to channels, yeah, I think that is very unfortunate that, legacy channels and even sometimes the print media put out completely wrong information. But I will say the frequency with which they put out incorrect information is not that high. By and large, their reportage is factually correct. I may have a problem with the aesthetics or the dog whistles or the kind of primetime debates that feed into an anger and a frenzy. That is a separate matter. And I think that needs to be dealt with differently. But it comes to outright misinformation, it is there. There have been, several examples of it. We at News Laundry have, pointed out we have done several stories. If you just go to our website, you'll see a bunch that have been done in the last 3 weeks, including, the JNU related. There was a lot of, fake stories that went out. A lot of fake information is shared by anchors on prime time. It's not a report, but bolte they'll say something that is completely inaccurate or untrue. So that is deeply unfortunate. The problem with that is that will have to be dealt with the digital age. I think people who have a commitment to news and journalism as a craft and a public service will get credibility in the long run. I don't think the internet will let such legacy media survive, but there is an important aspect of the regulatory framework that we operate under. As long as the regulatory framework remains like a big daddy regulatory framework, like many regulatory frameworks in India are, and it is completely dependent on the whims of the official sitting there who will reward someone for doing fake news while punish others who are trying to fight it, this problem will remain. I will repeat for the fifth time, I guess, in this, the biggest solution is political.
I don't know, somehow for me to see everything boiling down to political gains is a little difficult. I mean, something as innocent as what Mr. Tata said, how is that tied to political gains?
It's not. I'm not saying that's tied, which is why I started off by saying that that is benign. You know, it may not have any beneficiary, but I would rather confront the ones that does real damage. Misinformation, like the Hindi news channel said that there are 11 people in Arunachal who were tied to the Tablighi Jamaat who were COVID positive. Arunachal authorities said, no, that's not true. Then Z News issued an apology. The point is they went with it. And this is one of the largest viewed news channels in the country. And it is...
You're talking about cases where...
See, the thing is that, I'm not saying that there is a political gain. It's like a trend. You see, someone sets a trend. Someone sets a trend of wearing a certain jacket and everyone starts calling it either Nehru jacket or Modi jacket, depending on who you like. But the point is then everybody will start wearing it. Half sleeve kurtas have been worn by the people at Harmandir Sahib and the Gurudwaras ever since I was a child. But today they're more popular because Mr. Modi wears them. So what I'm saying is when a trendsetter sets a trend, the solution is a lot faster. This Ratan Tata's, this thing is fine. It's there, but
harmless.
I mean, I'm not saying it's harmless. I mean, he wants to, that trend will follow bigger trends. The tail won't wag the dog.
So, the COVID-19 crisis is a very good example. So that's a pandemic. You use the word as well. The World Health Organization has called it, and what we're talking about, the infodemic, right? So now the pandemic is being fought by a whole bunch of steps, including extreme ones like, locking down, containing, fight for vaccines, expanding hospital capacity, putting all frontline medical staff into action and so on. The infodemic needs a similar response. Now, if you treat misinformation as a public health emergency, and this is not my original thought, this has been stated and articulated earlier as well, then you would respond differently. Governments would respond differently. Last year, I wrote an article in the Times of India saying that, the Election Commission needs to take the initiative on educating people about misinformation in the context of elections in specific, and in the context of believing or being careful about what they believe in general. So to go back to the point that I was making earlier, so how do you make people skeptical, more questioning, more wary about everything that they see or they consume or are about to consume? By educating them. Who's going to take that initiative at scale? So I said Election Commission because at that time it felt that most misinformation was somewhat connected to elections, political parties, positions on various issues, and so on. So and that example still holds true today, except that with COVID, I think things have changed in as much as a pandemic has become even bigger than, let's say, a communal or a social or a political battle or a when I say battle, I mean a misinformation battle. But it's only a government which that can take up something and deliver on scale and deliver it in a way that it's educating people. So this is not new. And none of this is new. it's to either India or any other country. I think, as Abhinandan said, maybe governments are not sure how to do this. Maybe some governments are...
It's a little confusing. Why? Because they do benefit from it at some point, right? Whenever it's political, they benefit. So if they are one of the...
So governments are run by political parties and who also fight elections, and therefore maybe they are. So the point is that maybe that's why they are wary, and that's why maybe we are not seeing governments in many countries or most countries take this up actively. But I think that's where the solution is. We are saying, if you're saying this is a public health emergency in a way of the mind, perhaps like pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic is of the body, then you have to attack it like that. You have to create awareness like that. You have to lock down, I mean, very virtually the mind and say that, okay, now shut your mind up and only allow a few things to enter. And where you are screening everything before you consume it, you question everything, you send things back, you are let's say impolite with people who send you things continuously, which clearly are non-authenticated or even spreading hate.
Or you just send them back a link of Boom Live which says that this is...
Sure, of course, please do. Yeah. Which I always do, and but it takes time. I mean, on a day, I mean, now particularly with COVID, I mean, maybe 10, 15 times a day, I'm
content, how much we bust.
Yeah, populating groups and so on, because sometimes it is frustrating. Earlier maybe you could ignore it because you say, okay, maybe people will find out, maybe not. But sometimes it does get very frustrating, and you want to jump in and shake people up. To use Abhinandan's example, in an older era, you would maybe walk up to that person and shake that person up, saying that, listen, why are you spreading this again and again? You can't do that. I mean, you just have to keep bombarding what you think is the truth.
So I have a really interesting question from Mr. Prashant, who's the advisor to Mr. Manish Sisodia, the Deputy CM of Delhi. He's in the audience. Thank you so much for the question. He says, how do you shield people of lower economic strata from the menace of fake news, where the bulk of misinformation is spread, considering the fact that scientific temperament is low in those societies, and there's a direct link between the two? Also, how do you make identifying fake news a part of education, which Govind, you just said?
Yeah, so I think people are doing it. I mean, I talked about the Election Commission. I think there are, even within this country, there are good examples. In Kerala, there's a district collector who has touched several hundreds of schools with small modules. We ourselves do a training module for school children. We've touched about 3,000 students, very small number, but we've tried it, where we do quizzes and so on. I think there's a larger point, and this is debatable. I mean, I'm not an expert here, but I think it's not fair to say that people who are, let's say, in a lower economic strata are more susceptible. This is very elementary education. This is saying that you have to be careful about anything that you get and ask questions. I think to ask questions and to have a certain sense of, I don't know if suspicion is the right word, but let's say a certain sense of wariness about what you get is something that can be inculcated. Now, how do you physically reach out to people, whether you do it through posters, whether you do it, I mean, again, there are interesting examples from all over. In Andhra and Telangana, there are police officers who are doing on-ground work, but then a lot of this was done after the child kidnapping episodes that we had in 2018-19. And so each one can evolve. And I mean, in that sense, to do it in a Delhi is much simpler. And I'm sure the AAP or other political parties or those who work with them, if they are determined, can find the solution. The solutions will be very simple, and they have to be very simple, and they can be done and should be done. I'm sure Abhinandan wants to add.
Yeah, I think solution to this, and we've been discussing this within the organization, and we have a little team at News Laundry who's working on a little module. I think it has to start at a school level. I think we've entered an age of this information bombardment. I think you just called it something, the infodemic. So it's here to stay. You're going to get information from now, just like in school, we were taught everything from science, that the earth is not flat, it's round, and it's not the center of the universe, it's a part of a solar system, it revolves on the sun. You were taught how, chemistry, so that, something an apple turns black because of iron in it and not because the sun is giving it a sharp for wasting food or whatever. Their basic education was given because the conventional beliefs were superstitious. The the point of education was that conventional, superstitious, inaccurate beliefs are completely removed from society, and that started with education. That is the purpose of education. That's the purpose of math. That's the purpose of science. The purpose of the languages is to communicate better. I think we are still working with an academic curriculum that is optimized for our age. We have to add one, like, what was that poster, that meme that went around? Adarsh Balak, na?
Be like Bill.
Adarsh Balak, maa baap ki seva karta hai. I think that whole Adarsh Balak thing has to include one module कि Adarsh Balak कुछ मानता नहीं है, Adarsh Balak गधा नहीं है, ठीक है? So just like science and stuff is taught, I think there has to be it has to be a part of basic education, that how do you sift through or filter information that you get. From now to the time you die, you are going to be blasted by information the world over. Just like you were blasted by रात को अपनी ये मत काटना, Tuesday को shave मत करना, all this kind of stuff. Science did away with that. This has to start at that level. And I'm sure, Govind is doing it. We are working on a module which doesn't just include basic media literacy. We're also, including something on media entrepreneurship, because negotiating a way around regulation in India is also a challenge. I think it has to be included as a compulsory subject, just like social science was. Just for social hygiene, mental hygiene is also important. And I'm not saying you have to start including chapters about, glorifying one, historical figure against the other. Only vanilla education of how you consume data from now to the time you die.
To that, I think there's a complication in my head, which is post-truth. So even if you go back and start Googling and start finding whether this piece of information or news is correct or not, there's so much content around proving a certain concept right in the post-truth era that you might just stumble upon that and start feeling that, this is truer and that's not. So, well, a lot of false information has been made to become truth. Yeah. In today's time, and that's also scary. I'm going to take that question a little later, but I think the
sorry, I'm so sorry. The example you gave, Juhi, net, you still came out more informed. I'd like to give you the example of the 2008 Lehman crash. These collateralized debt obligations, or these, bonds that were related to property, the subprime crisis. There was, many of these quants were under the impression that they have eliminated risk. You can't eliminate risk. You can try and minimize risk. Similarly, as news professionals or those commenting on us, we should not ever have the arrogance of economists and quants, because the world has suffered, that we can eliminate misinformation. We will try to minimize it. So even your exercise of going in and stumbling upon 10 things, you came out better informed. Just like when the printing press was invented, printing presses publish, Salman Rushdie, it publishes the Bible, it publishes Mastram Masti Mein Aag Lage Basti Mein, it publishes everything. But net, it has led to a more informed world, while a lot of shit also gets published. Net, getting people to dig deeper in will get them better informed, not worse, when we look at a larger picture.
I think if I were to come back on COVID-19, one of the clear lessons, and this is something that has been clear even much before COVID-19, is that when it comes to health and medical issues, no one can stop anyone from, using the internet or, searching on Google and asking people for forwards and so on. But what you can do is to consult your physician and make that a compulsion that, I will not act on anything unless I consult my physician. Because whatever internet research I do, the fact is that a physician is qualified and trained to understand how my body or my physiognomy or physiology works, and what will be the outcome of a certain disease progression or the medicines that may be administered and so on. So I mean, I know there is no physician equivalent for everything else we do, or there might be, but at least in the case of health, I mean, I cannot stop you from going and seeing webmd.com because you have a sprain at your back, which of course WebMD will tell you that it could be anything from a sprain to bone marrow cancer, and it's all right. But I can surely say that please consult a physician for whatever problem you have, whether it's something major or if it's a nutritional issue that you're grappling with. Consult a physician, consult a specialist who is qualified, and then take a decision.
Okay, makes a lot of sense. I think I want to come to the most important question of the webinar today, is that what are your top sources of news, information, and government notifications? Because things like the lockdown is going to happen, going to get extended, we're going to run out of groceries, this sector is going to be allowed, that sector is not going to be allowed. Am I falling in the hotspot? Am I not? These are things that can really have an impact on us as individuals, also as businesses. So for normal people, where should we go and get verified, credible, authentic news, information, and government notifications?
Okay, Abhinandan, you want to go first?
Yeah, I think for announcements of what is policy decision, one should only go to those makers of policy. So that is whether it is the Twitter accounts or the whatever platform they are using to communicate, of the government, the state government or the central government or the health ministry, whoever is responsible for it. I think that is too simple. There are credible news organizations. I don't want to get into that because then it gets partisan again. Just go to the source. When it comes to the medical aspects of it, I mean, I just like to say, because I'm consuming a lot of content around this, this is an evolving story. What is true today may not be true tomorrow. And what is true tomorrow may not be true day after tomorrow. People are still figuring this out. And I think on that, one has to get as much information as possible from as many credible sources. And again, by credible sources, I mean like medical practitioners, they're commentators, they're doctors who are commenting on this. Many news organizations are running conversations with them. There are blogs that are of actual medical practitioners who are credible, but it is an evolving story. So on something like this, and this is very different from all the other fake news we've discussed. So I would just urge those listening and communicating to others, just because something that someone who's credible said yesterday, today has turned out to be untrue, doesn't mean that person is propounding fake news. People are still trying to figure this virus out. So especially in this case, take medical, commentary seriously, but it's still not a mathematical theorem. They haven't come to a conclusion yet.
Govind?
So what's the question?
What are your top sources of news, information?
So, the way we work is we do three things. The first is we use tech and tools when there are images and video involved, and there is many of them are commonly available, like reverse image search and so on. There are a couple of tools that we use to do with identifying videos which are developed for us. So that's the tech and tools part. The second is broadly research, where particularly if there are numbers involved, if there is some claim involved, where we are looking to see if similar statements were made in the past and then correlate them and so on. And the third and most critical part is the journalism, and this is really the traditional part, if one can call it that, where we are actually calling up people, we are checking. I showed you that image of a letter purportedly from a home ministry official. So we had to call the home ministry at the center and say, is this been issued by you? And the person said, no, it's not been issued, nor does such a person exist in the system, and so on. So, and there are photographs of, let's say, police firing on a group of people in Guwahati. Then we would call the superintendent of police in Assam and say, has this happened? And can you verify for us whether this photograph is true? So from our point of view, at least there is there is no substitute for traditional on-ground physical verification, and that's the only way we'll be able to get a binary answer on these kind of posts and forwards, which is either it's true or it's not true. And that's one kind. The other is, when in general, I think it is good to redevelop some of the sources of information that we have. I think Abhinandan alluded to some of them. I would say that, for instance, when it comes to health and medicine, go for known names, like it could be a Johns Hopkins University, it could be a Cleveland Clinic, it could be an Indian Council for Medical Research, it could be, let's say, it could be one of the hospital chains who you trust in India. and develop them as a source, particularly if they are already putting out information in the public domain. Similarly, let's say if you're following science and technology as a broader theme, then try and see what the best sources for that are in the world. So someone says, oh, there is this big advancement that has happened in metallurgy. Then you try and see if you can go to where, the Metallurgical Society of something has posted something. So it's a little more cumbersome. You obviously want everything to be filtered and delivered to you in a way that's packaged and easy to consume. But I think life is a little more complex. And if we want to remain sane, I think we have to now really manage between some very specialist sources, and all of them, and all of us do in any case. I mean, if I'm a doctor, I do go to my specialist sources. I think now what's happening is a bit of a cross-pollination. So I flit between specialist sources that, like I said, I think we all need to redevelop a little bit. And then a couple of media brands that I can trust to deliver to me authentic, verified information. Largely, they can make mistakes, but largely deliver authentic, verified information to me on a daily basis. So I think that's how I would go forward. I think beyond that,
would you take some names or places like Abhinandan?
This is really an independent choice. I mean, it's not because I don't. I have my choices. I gave you some examples in the health space. In health in India, there is not enough reporting on health in this country. Hopefully, now this will change. Similarly, I think a lot of issues. The problem is when it comes to television, and I've been in television. The business model is broken. When the business model is broken, people do things which are completely contrary to what the original objective of that particular either platform or medium or enterprise was. So what you see, therefore, is wild speculation, angry debates, all of which is really to ensure that you achieve your rating points, which you can therefore go and hand it over to your salespeople who on Wednesday will be able to go back into the market. So the business model is broken. Now that is causing a lot of, downstream impact on the way people let's say, deliver news, information, and so on. Because the objective is not to say that I will deliver the truth or I will speak the truth, but how can I maximize my rating at that particular point of time, particularly in television. Newspapers is a little different, which is why newspapers can be more relied on, because the distribution problem, bottleneck ensures that people cannot jump into that space, and to some extent or to a larger extent that business model is more secure. And therefore what you get when you read that newspaper at home, I'm not saying this applies entirely to the digital versions, but at least the physical print product is a little more reliable and is forced to be in some ways. But
this is quite an irony, because when new media was coming up or digital was coming up, it was said print is going to die. And today we're in this stage where we're saying that, everybody wants to only trust print media.
No, I'm not saying that either. No, I think print has other problems. I'm not getting into that. I think when it comes to
complex discussion.
Yeah. There are other problems. Print is like large media organizations are enslaved to certain forms of advertising, and that creates problems, including government. I think a lot of us in the digital space are fulfilling certain niche requirements and needs, and we exist because obviously there is a gap elsewhere. And Abhinandan sort of talked about News Laundry and what they're doing. And what we are doing is in a slightly different space, but we're also fulfilling a niche need and requirement. So I think we all have to coexist, but I think we're looking at it from the point of the consumer. And all I'm saying there is that you have to redevelop your sources and revisit the ways and means that you consumed information with a much tighter and a harder lens, so to speak.
Juhi, since we are talking about fake news, I thought it would be important that I, just end on this. And also, I'll give you two specific names. I'd read on the internet that Aristotle had said it, and later Vivekananda also said it, and Bapu Gandhi also said that when you're doing a Zoom webinar, never miss an opportunity to plug your own product. Now, I don't know whether they said it, but I read it on the internet. So two good sources are Boom and newslaundry.com. You must always plug your own product.
And for opinions, also do read ET Times.
Yes, so that wisdom has been passed down from the Rig Veda to, the latest. So newslaundry.com and boom.com, please check out.
Boomlive.in.
Boomlive.in, sorry.
And ettimes.in, yes.
But because people, if you ask them, kaun sa stock kharide, you say, you have to check the fundamentals, market in this industry is moving this way. They say, yaar, batao kaun sa stock kharide. So because we are me and Govind are news professionals and we are geeks who keep looking at various sources. If someone just wants a quick, recommendation, there are two other than the two that I just gave of Boom Live and News Laundry. BBC is an organization that has tremendous resources. They have started a daily podcast on Corona. They used to have a daily news podcast, which is excellent, but specifically on Corona, on developments the world over. Those could be political developments, which country is doing lockdown, what the death rate is, and any medical, new emerge, anything new that has emerged medically.
There's also a concern about BBC being a little, not pro-India. Is that true?
Well, no, that's not true. And on this, it's not pro or anti. This is quite. I think they are not discussing on the podcast whether Kashmir's Corona is Pakistan's fault or India's fault. They are telling you so many deaths in such and such country. This is what doctors here are saying. This is what doctors there are saying. It gives you an idea of what is happening the world over. So it puts things in perspective, and it is only on Corona. So no matter what your politics, it is not a partisan issue that they're discussing. On the economic impact of Corona, NPR Planet Money and the sister podcast, The Indicator, have amazing analysis of how this is impacting the world on the economy. Of course, they are America focused, but because the resources they have, they are such well-researched and in-depth, pieces of information. I think anyone who listens to those two podcasts on the, on Corona's on ground, what's happening medically and as far as deaths and occurrences concerned, and economically, these two are enough to keep you at least safe from forwarding bullshit on WhatsApp. You'll be safe.
So we have a very interesting question. I'm going to take this. It's going to lighten the whole mood. From an anonymous attendee, I don't know why we don't have a name here. Have you ever fallen for fake news yourself, Govind and Abhinandan?
I have. I have in the sense that I have believed something, and because of the same biases and the pro biases and
do you remember any particular example?
No, I don't remember specifically, but I think one of the early cases, one of the early ones, one of these time covers which used to come, and the first time it happened, right? So you never thought that someone could actually doctor an image which is supposedly time cover, and I remember it showed Donald Trump in some content, some context. So I kind of believed it. I mean, not that I did anything with it, but I believed it. And there have been other similar occasions where I have fallen for something, but of course I'm far more careful now. And I think the number of times I would fall for something is much less. And I definitely don't forward something that unless I'm absolutely sure about it. But I'm human. And people are getting smarter and more ingenious at designing misinformation or fake news. And therefore we will fall for it. I don't think there is any doubt about that.
I think I would have, like Govind said, I think I would have probably fallen for it a couple of times, but I am a lot more careful. I don't believe it just because I see it on Twitter or on WhatsApp. Over the last few years, make sure I get to the source of it. But yeah, I think casually, if you're flipping something, I may look at something and take it seriously in my head, but it is highly unlikely I will quote that anywhere as fact until I've checked it out.
Also, do we know of WhatsApp bringing up this fake news checking mechanism? I mean, within the app, I think there's going to be an upgrade where I don't know how you can check the news to be fake or not. Do we know of that latest update of WhatsApp?
I'm not aware of any such fake news filter that they have. I know various things are being discussed. Govind and I have both been on seminars and roundtables, often organized by Facebook, to come up with ideas, and a lot of very good ideas have emerged during those. There's a certain practical issues about how you can implement those, but to the best of my knowledge, they don't have any fake news filter.
Google has a reverse image check, which is the simplest thing you can do. Or if there's a piece of news, you can just Google it and see the top results that come out from credible news media. You think WhatsApp is not going to come up with any such format?
I don't know. There is a search message feature, which I think is coming up. And see, what they're doing is trying to curtail distribution, I think, which in itself is an important thing. How many chat groups can you forward it to? and they made it 5, and
now it's lesser than 5.
Yeah. So no, I think you can still do 5, but I think to number of chat groups you can do. So earlier maybe you could send to 5 groups of 250 people each, and I think now there is a constraint on that. So I think that's one way that they're working. I mean, but that's a different discussion. I mean, at least I'm not fully prepared to with what all they have done in the recent past, but I know that they are constantly doing stuff, and we also talk to them frequently.
So I think the last question I'd like to take before wrapping up this webinar, and that should have covered almost all the questions, 36 of them that we've received on the Q&A panel, is that what role can an individual play when they receive an innocent WhatsApp forward, mostly which invokes an emotion in them and compels them to forward, because it's either sadness or pride or fear which makes them forward it, and it could be totally without malicious intent. But you said that we can control it at the demand side. Therefore, what role can we as individuals play apart from going back and saying, what's your source?
I think that is it. I mean, everything, all big problems require simple solutions. I think the simple solution is that, first of all, we apply our minds and think twice for any forward, unless it's someone asking you, how are you doing? Or, I mean, something of that nature. And the second thing is to push back at the person who sent it to you. I would really stop there. I don't think, I mean, there are a lot of other things we can talk about, but I think it's really that. And you have to improve or strengthen the filters that you have in your mind. There is no substitute to that.
I would recommend 2 things. One is, like Govind has also said, and we've said that throughout, you have to make it uncool to share stuff that is inaccurate and say, what is your source? Even if it may sound rude, and you have to do it as often as you can. And I'll tell you what could trigger this, and we can figure out what that event may be. I went to an all boys school, so I'm part of a lot of groups that are all boys groups. And the kind of conversation that happen in all boys groups is often objectionable. But in the last 4 or 5 years, Me Too being one trigger, gender dynamic has become a big issue. So earlier, if you were sitting with a bunch of guys and someone said something sexist or offensive, even if you thought it was problematic, you wouldn't say it. It was not cool. It was not okay. Today, I see so many people calling out sexist comments of all boys groups who are childhood friends saying, dude, you can't say that. That is not okay. What triggered it? It was a big, worldwide movement of, hashtag Me Too or hashtag No More. I think there were 2 different hashtags that were used. Time's Up, hashtag Time's Up. So now it is socially acceptable to call out someone for sexism. It was not socially acceptable 15, 20 years ago. You would pay a social cost. You would not be included in, groups and gangs and parties. Similarly, we need some such trigger like a Me Too trigger or Time's Up trigger, where it is socially acceptable to call out someone for bullshit without having to feel that you will be ostracized by the rest. Now, what that trigger is, we need a Harvey Weinstein equivalent who spreads fake news. I hope people find one. And we're all there to amplify that voice. I have a few suggestions, but I'll keep those to myself.
I think what has worked for me simply has been on major WhatsApp groups where, you have intelligent people and they are pretty smart WhatsApp groups coming from credible organizations. They post something which is fake, you send them back another link or an article from a very credible mainstream media which is busting that. And the first reaction of everyone will be, oh my God, and they become defensive. And I think that itself puts a stop not just to that person, but to so many others who see it's not really also directly calling out, it's just posting another thing which is rebutting what you posted. You're not getting into a direct verbal duel with anyone, you're not shaming, but at the same time, you're putting people really on the back foot. And maybe before forwarding the next thing, they're going to be very careful. So with that, I'd like to wrap up this webinar. Thank you so much, attendees and audience, for coming in and posting so many questions. They were really interesting. Thank you so much, Govind. Thank you so much, Abhinandan, for all that gyan that we got. And guys, please do subscribe to all 3 platforms. Check us out. What Abhinandan said, this is the time to promote ourselves. Thank you so much, CI, for having us. And with that, it's a wrap.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.